Hi, my name is Chris Rodriguez. They call me C-Rod where I work at NetApp. I'm been in all different divisions of NetApp. I've been working with Citrix since 1990. I've been working with Horizon View since it first came out, and I've worked with a slew of other smaller VDI packages. Today we're going to talk about 7 deadly sins of VDI deployments. I have a lot of hands-on experience. I used to do installations. I've got well over 1,200 installations under my belt of VDI deployments. And so I've seen everything and anything out there. And we're going to go through the top 7. And we have a short period of time, so we won't get into the details of everything. But I do have a blog that you can look at that Frank Anderson of Cloud Jumper and myself have produced for this, so you can go get all the detailed information. Plus I have a lot of reference architectures that I've done over the years testing, and you can see the details of the 7 items and how to resolve them. So let's get started. So the first one is hypervisors not properly configured. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into sites and they'll configure their VDI installations, specifically Horizon View and their hypervisor for things like databases and other things. Those of you who've been around VDI for a while, you know that VDI, most of the specialists out there will say it's 80% writes, 20% reads. What they don't tell you is the 20% reads are during boots, in boot ups, logins, and then you get a lot of heavy writes when you log out. And the problem with that is those 20% reads are extremely heavy. So you got to have support from both ends to do that, and you got to make sure the hypervisor is configured properly. So you need to make sure VAI or VCAI for Horizon View is implemented. You need to make sure that queue depths are properly set if it's block channel. If it's block, you need to make sure that Ethernet items are set if you're using NFS data stores or iSCSI data stores. I'm a big fan with iSCSI of walling off path A's and path B's and doing 2 separate VLANs for those. So, but you can read more about setting the hypervisor properly. One of the things is that if you look at HCI equipment and HCI infrastructure, it will automatically set the hypervisor for that environment, for that infrastructure, for best practices as you need. So that's why I'm a big fan of HCI, and literally a year and a half ago in the NetApp team, I moved over from some of our core storage teams and engineering over to our HCI team. Second one is infrastructure. Infrastructure design, that's very, very important. You got to make sure that you design it for your user base. I was at a large military base in San Antonio, and we call them green shirts, the military personnel went in and decided to reboot a server in the middle, a switch in the middle of the day in the closet, knocked down a whole floor of users, and they couldn't work half the day and they didn't understand why. And the network team didn't understand that it just knocked out productivity for a bunch of VDI users, and the 5-star general got really, really upset about it. So in a nutshell, you got to make sure that there's proper design, there's redundancy, and that all staff understands the repercussions of what they're doing, because VDI, they don't always necessarily have a desktop that they can refer back to, especially if they're using a zero client or thin client. Load balancing, and I'm not talking about network load balancing. Every time I bring this subject up, the first thing everybody comes to mind is network load balancing. I'm talking about infrastructure load balancing of the data. Okay, it's really important. There's been several times I've gone in and had to troubleshoot sites with extreme problems with VDI, and our support team will call me and say, hey, I need you to take a look at this. This is getting escalated. And I go and find out that they have all their data on one HBA port, funneling through one HBA port or one Ethernet port. And then there's ASIC chip buffering considerations you get into on the storage or on the compute nodes, on the servers, and all the way down the path, right? So there's all types of issues you can have if load is not properly balanced all the way through the stack. That's why I'm a big fan of MPIO. But if you're doing Ethernet, Ethernet has the capability of doing 100 gigabit and 40 gigabit, 100 gigabit on backplane and 40 gigabit to the storage and to the compute nodes. And now actually on our HCI product you can do 100 gigabit all the way through to the compute nodes all the way through. And what I like about 100 gigabit is it provides more buffer cache, as I mentioned, to those ASIC chips. So it's faster and more bandwidth, but it's not just bandwidth. It doesn't get in a situation of queuing, which can kill performance, because today everything's running off SSDs for VDI. So that's real important. But anyways, I get insights and I find that the load is sitting all on one path all the way through, and you got to break that out. Sometimes it takes manual interference. By the way, on Ethernet, the reason why in networking we push real heavily LACP is because it does link detection very, very fast. And so that's why we still push it over something like a more granular method of load balancing like MPIO. Now, if you're doing block protocol, MPIO is definitely my preference and recommendation for that, and that will help out with balancing the load across all the ports and all the paths and all the volumes. There's another thing on load balancing I talk about in my blog, and what we do with minimum QoS, and it'll spread the load automatically. This is the fifth sin that I talk about, is high availability. And even though you think in VDI that you don't need high availability because you can restore things from pools real quick, or you can clone stuff really fast, and so on and so forth, or you can use host profiles and create the hosts really fast, that's not the top of high availability I'm talking about. It's the illustration I gave you of the military base, that if a floor gets knocked down, they can't work. And today, as we move into workplace transformation, digital transformation, I've heard, where you can access anything at any time, where I can access my desktop from this phone, you definitely need availability at the back end, and stability, and multiple paths, and redundancy. So that's really, really important. So one of the things when I'm big on, I mentioned on HCI these days for VDI, I like to have big clusters, 10, 12 storage systems, and run multiple workloads on it, and then run VDI on it as well. This is contrary to the old HA path, two storage node system way of doing things, but it's the new. And then the same thing with the compute nodes. I like to have things spread out amongst many servers. And then number 6, runaway VMs, VDI bullies. I was at a really large account in Chicago, healthcare customer, and they had a situation every day at 11 o'clock, all their VDI desktops would come to a halt for about 30 minutes to an hour, and they were wondering why. And so I had to dive in there and figure out what was going on. What it ended up being was they had a bunch of offshore Oracle programmers that decided to do RMAN dumps at their time zone whenever it was. That wouldn't affect them, but it was bringing everybody into Chicago down to its knees in a shared infrastructure. So first of all, let me tell you how I isolated that. There's 3 tools out there that you can use. They've been here at the show at VMworld. They were at the Expo. You can use Lakeside or Liquid Labs. I know both those folks really well. They have great tools. And then you can also use a tool called ControlUp. For troubleshooting purposes, I use ControlUp because it polls every 3 seconds. So it's a real-time tool, and it has more polling capabilities. For installations and VDI fit scenarios, I use Liquid Labs. So I use different tools for different things. And then for monitoring, I really like Lakeside. So, pick one of the tools that best meets your needs. Those 3 are real popular tools, but I'm big on ControlUp because I can find things really fast with a 3-second polling. I use it in my labs too when I do testing, so it's real important. But when we isolated that we had those groups of users that was doing that, all we did was we put them in their own volume, and we locked them down with a QoS policy, and then we turned around their important users, and we gave them a minimum QoS policy, so they guaranteed that the other users always had IOPS. And if we ever had a runaway VM again or a VDI desktop, it didn't affect everybody. And then lastly, the desktop image and login process. I walked into a university one time that they had me go look at their problems they were having. Had nothing to do with the infrastructure. It had all to do with the desktop image. So the desktop image wasn't tuned. They had a lot of stuff in it. You can turn on the debugger for login process, and when you do that, you see actually what goes on step by step. And they had things that were so old that were still calling programs and data that was supposed to be sitting in the net login directory, the dollar directory, net login directory, and they weren't there, right? So it was taking 60 seconds while I was pulling. What was happening to these students, these college students, is they would get a test and it would take them 3 minutes to 5 minutes each to log in. And then if they were all logging in at the same time, you know, or they had high usage, they had 2,000 students, they all hit at the same time, then it was even longer. It'd take as long as 30 minutes for them to log in. All those students piled up into the dean's office or the IT department and complained about it. So I got flown in to look at it, and all it had to do, it had nothing to do with the infrastructure. They had SSDs, they had flash media, they had high-speed servers with high-speed memory, everything you can imagine, plenty of bandwidth. The problem was the desktop image was so bad that it had to be cleaned up. So use the OST scripts that are written. That Horizon View has a optimization, and so does Citrix. In addition to that, after cleaning up the image, go through the login process and turn on debug and make sure that it log in. I have plenty more answers to these issues and also other issues that come up. If you go check my blog out, you can blog C-Rod or Chris Rodriguez and Frank Anderson, and we'll be publishing this right after VMworld so that you can see these answers. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.